Welcome to Kev's Travel Stories. Each week I'll be bringing you a story from the weird and wonderful world of travel, a world that can change the way you see life and love and even the way we find meaning. Places that are iconic and sometimes surprising and even terrifying. So sit back and enjoy while we go on a magical mystery tour together. Welcome to Kevin's Travel Stories, and this time I'm going to tell you about a unique opportunity. Dear listener, it's so privileged to be a travel journalist and podcaster because you get to experience some things that are quite rare, and it's important, I think, to share these stories. And one thing that I had the privilege of doing, which any of you could actually have the privilege of doing, this is really why I'm sharing this story, is to travel around a country in your own private train. Well, private trains have a very rarefied history. The emperors, the queens, the kings, the political heads of states are usually the only people that have their own train. But there's a man in Ireland called Jim Deegan who set up a company called Rail Tours Ireland. And his brainwave idea was to have a private train and a private Pullman carriage and take you around and show you the wonders of Ireland on your own train. Well, of course, I jumped at the chance to do this. It sounded utterly fascinating. I mean, the Orient Express is one thing, but to have your own private train and only a handful of other people on it. It was during the pandemic and tourism had taken a big hit. And this was just as we were coming out of it. So there was very few people when we turned up at Euston Station, which is one of the main stations in Dublin, to board our own Pullman Express. And what a welcome we got. There was a piper. There was a violinist on board the train. We were piped on board, given a glass of champagne, and sat down in our own comfortable seats. We had two people who were serving us, a chef and a waiter, and we were looked after like kings and queens, I'd have to say. So what is it like to travel Ireland in your own private train? Well, it's a really fascinating journey. Trains have a bit of a bad press now. Since the lockdown, there's been quite a lot of antisocial behavior. No such thing can happen when you're in this select company. And the way Jim organizes his private train is that you get on the train, you have your own separate area where you can be completely comfortable within. Every night you arrive at a hotel, a very good quality hotel. We started off at the Great Southern Hotel in Killarney, which is one of the most beautiful parts of the world. And we'd been to Waterford and we'd been down to Cove and we'd seen where the Titanic had boarded and we saw where all the famine ships left for America. So this was a trip that was laced with history. I can remember in Cove, you go through the museum, which showed how many of the thousands and tens of thousands of Irish people who fled the country because of famine, the potato famine, and the turbulent historic times, they were given passage to America, and it could be a very, very difficult journey. Not everybody survived that journey, and then they were dumped at the end in a place where they had very little knowledge of how to deal. Many were from the countryside, and they were in a big metropolis like New York. So this was all very fascinating. But the great bit was that you were brought in your private train. You had access to the museum, special access, no queuing. And then when you'd finished, you went straight back to your private train. You were served a cup of tea. It was, I'd have to say, absolutely delightful and a little bit magical. I've toured the world and I've done a lot of different things, and I'm very, very lucky to have done that. But the sense of comfort and the sense of safety when you went back to your train after taking various excursions was truly wonderful. And you swept through stations and didn't stop. You arrived and were greeted with a little red carpet. It was really a very special trip. And I would strongly recommend, if you want to see Ireland, that you would check out Rail Tours Ireland, Jim Deegan, and just look at the itinerary. We stayed at the Great Southern Hotel in Killarney, which is one of the great hotels, I'd have to say, of Ireland. It's only 4-star, but I think the star system sometimes gets it wrong. I would comfortably say this is absolutely up there with the best hotels in Ireland. The rooms are extraordinary. The level of cuisine, the culture of looking after guests, I think is second to none. And Killarney is one of the most beautiful places in God's earth. And then the next day, you get back on the train and you're off on another adventure. One of the big highlights was doing the Ring of Kerry. So we arrived in the train. We were then transferred to a coach which took us around the Ring of Kerry. The sun shone, the sea glittered, the beautiful fauna and flora of County Kerry was blossoming in front of your very eyes. It was a magnificent trip. And then you're back to your train, and that night we went up to Galway. And the next big part of the adventure was Connemara. Travelling through Connemara, going to see Kylemore Abbey, seeing Ashford Castle and the place where John Wayne had that extraordinary moment in that John Huston movie. It's an area that's so laced with cultural, fictional, imaginative associations of all kinds. Jim Deegan is also a great historian of railways in Ireland, and they've a checkered history because they go all the way back to the British occupation and then the battle for independence and how the railway weaved itself in and out of the narrative. And we visited some of the old sites, some of the train stations that have been left to go to decay. He's bringing back some of them himself. So this was really an extraordinary experience. Connemara, with its limestone and its granite and that sort of stark beauty, is a place that, to see it from a train, is extraordinary. It gives an edge. The trip ended up in Belfast, and it was wonderful to arrive at Belfast at the main train station, and we walked over to a hotel that used to be infamous, the Europa Hotel. It was the most bombed hotel in the world during the 70s, when the Troubles were at their worst and the IRA were attacking the British Army, and the hotel was bombed on numerous occasions. And I had the opportunity and the privilege to talk to the concierge there, who had been there when the bombs were laid in the foyer. He even got to know some of the people who laid the bombs because they were so regular and they had certain tip-off signs and code words that they used. Belfast is a wonderful place to visit if you do take this particular train journey, because you can go and see the Peace Wall, you can take the black taxi ride around. They now have the Titanic Museum. There's an open bus tour which is absolutely fabulous. And then you've got the famous market, and the market has some great restaurants in it, and you will really, I think, get a real look at the two parts of Ireland which have been brought together when you go on this private coach train trip. Coming back to Dublin, it was very bizarre after having been so cosseted, having been so comfortable. Every time you go back to your seat, there's a cup of tea waiting, or you can have a gin and tonic. There's a certain comfort in that. And when we got off at the end, after 7 days of being away, after being cosseted and having this extraordinary view of Ireland, there was a sense of what a journey we've all been on together. So if you want to try something different, if you want to experience life differently, try the 7-day trip around Ireland with Rail Tours Ireland. I personally think it's one of the best ways that you will actually get to experience Ireland, and you'll be cosseted and you'll be safe and you'll be able to relax, sit back and enjoy what's really important, which is the countryside and the people that you meet at the end of the track. Thank you, Jim. It's a wonderful, wonderful and quite unique form of holiday, and I'd strongly encourage anybody listening to this podcast to look it up and give it a try. You'll never forget your trip on a private train.